Executive Director of AVA Gallery, if you don't know me. It's wonderful to see so many new faces and so many familiar faces here. Janet, thank you for bringing so many of your friends. With so many new faces, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that AVA Gallery and Art Center is a place that's obviously very warm and near and dear to our hearts. This facility, this building, Carter Kelsey building, is 41,500 square feet of space devoted to art. That does not include the sculpture studio. That's 4,000 square feet. In here we have these 4 galleries as our prime galleries. There's a new members gallery just the other side of that wall that we haven't totally fitted out. There are 5 working art studios in the building: Children's Studio, North Studio, South Studio, Digital Media Lab, Print Studio downstairs, a library and resource center on the 2nd floor, and the other half of the 2nd floor and all of the 3rd floor have 20 working artist studios. That's this building. The brand new building across the parking lot is 4,000 square feet that has 4 working studios, one devoted to stone carving, one devoted to ceramics, one devoted to woodworking, and a 4th that we call the hot studio that has welding, plasma cutting, metal forging, glass molding, and just about anything you can think of that involves fire. But it's a very exciting time at AVA Gallery. We're expanding. We have just started our programming in the new Sculptural Studies building within the last 10 days. There's classes happening over there today, so I have to go over there for a little bit during this talk. But thank you so much for coming. We are thrilled and honored to have you here. I'm going to introduce Jen Lay, our exhibition coordinator, who will introduce Janet. So, Jen.
Hi, thanks for coming out. All right, Janet Hulings Bleicken of Hancock, New Hampshire, received her BA in Fine Arts from Pennsylvania State University and studied at Rhode Island School of Design. Her recent exhibitions include shows at the Copley Society in Boston, Mass., Hood Museum of Art in Hanover, New Hampshire, and the Sharon Arts Center of Sharon, New Hampshire. Janet's work is included in numerous public collections, including the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, New Hampshire, and the Thorne-Sagendorf Art Gallery in Keene, New Hampshire. Her work is also in many private collections. For her exhibition, When I Grow Up, I'll Be a Painter Too, Janet displays a series of narrative paintings inspired by her childhood. She states, "I have never wanted to be anything other than a painter. My parents were indulgent, if not entirely sympathetic, and took me to almost every art museum I requested. They gave me an unlimited budget to buy the postcard-sized reproductions of the paintings I loved best. Over time, my bedroom walls were papered with art. This show is a journey through my childhood memory of the painters who allowed me to believe I could become a painter too." Please join me in welcoming Janet.
Thank you for coming. She's just gave you my entire talk, so I don't have to say much more. About 2 years ago, I sent a proposal up here to AVA Gallery asking them to give me a show. Margaret Jacobs called and asked me if I would come up and talk, and I did. And I went through a number of ideas. I knew that the AVA was booking shows well in advance, and so I gave her a number of ideas of series that I thought I might do. And at one point in that conversation, she said to me, "Well, how old were you when you decided you wanted to be a painter?" And I said, "Well, I always wanted to be a painter. I can't remember a time when that isn't what I was going to do." And after some thought, she said, "Well, who were your favorite painters when you were a child?" And I went, blank. You know, it's been 60 years, since then. And I've obviously fallen in love with countless painters over those years, and I couldn't honestly tell her who my favorite painters were from my childhood. And so in the drive home, I tried to figure out if I could remember and determined that I couldn't, and worked out a strategy of how to approach this question. And so the following week, I got out all those boxes of photographs that my mother had saved, and I pulled out all the photographs I could find from my childhood, birthday parties, other celebrations, vacations we took, and the houses that we lived in, hoping that would sort of prompt these memories. And it actually really works. For having a sort of a pretty much of a blank about those years, because I hadn't thought about them in a long, long time, I was able to start remembering, when we went on that vacation to Washington, we went to that museum, that must be where I saw the something or other. And from that, I came up with a list of artists that I could really remember being very impressed with as a child. And Jen mentioned that I used to buy the postcards that would have the reproductions of the paintings that I liked best. But when I went off to college, I wasn't smart enough or sentimental enough to save them, so my mother threw them all out. And I desperately wanted to try to remember what those paintings were that had excited me so much. And so I took the names of the artists, and we'll go through their names here, but this is the group. And I went to the web and I typed in the name of the artist, and then I hit the little button that says images. And when you do that, you pull up a huge volume of the body of work of that particular artist. And I sat there for hours sort of looking through every one of these little thumbnail images, and I managed to pull up maybe 20 paintings out of that were from my postcard collection, that I could make that connection. And so I printed those out. So then at that point, I was probably several weeks into the project, and I had this stack of reprints of these paintings, and was trying to decide, well, if I'm going to do a show about this, it's got to be based on the wonderful childhood memories. I mean, that's my reward for doing this. And so I tried to figure out how to approach it, and it sat on my desk for a long time while I finished up something else. And then finally, I came to this, not that I was ready to do this painting, but I was ready to start doing cartoons of this painting to see what this was going to look like with all of these people in a group. And what I remembered about collecting photographs of all these people is that my grandmother had read me biographies of some of them. And what I had learned from those biographies was that these were not remarkable people in a sense. They were ordinary people. And what was remarkable was the paintings they were making. And these people were like my uncles. I mean, that's how it felt. And so when I got to that, I realized that incredibly sort of egotistic moment as a child that I actually believed I was part of this group, that these were my people. And that was the inspiration for doing these paintings. So each of the paintings that's on the outside walls here are images from my postcard collection. And I've tried my best to remember how old I was when I discovered that particular painter, and work from a photograph of myself at that age and include myself in each of these images. Now, this is the last piece I did, and I was talking to Sarah Germain about it, and I had some of these photographs out, and I said something about Picasso, and she said, "Oh, you realize he was really short." And I went, "Oh, how tall was he?" And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do a group portrait, it's totally unfair if I make people relatively tall or short of each other. And I knew that I was going to include Lautrec, and of course he would be at a terrible disadvantage. So I went on the web to see if there was any way to find out how tall these people were. And I discovered that the two immigrants, Picasso and Soutine, I found their immigration papers on the web, and it actually gave their height, which I just couldn't believe I found that. And then the other people, I think I got everybody's height off the web except for, I think Monet. I had to extrapolate his height by finding a photograph where he was standing next to somebody whose height I knew. But I've got them here at their relative heights. The tallest among them was Marie, and in every photograph that I ever found of her, she's always sort of leaning forward, trying to reduce her height, which I thought was really quite wonderful. In determining how to portray these people, I decided what I needed to do was go out and read as much about them as I could. And so I found lots of, little biographical things or essays that I could read about them. And when it came to Picasso, of course, I had to do his striped espadrilles because he's so famous for that. But what I thought was interesting was that the Parisian studios were so cold in the winter that all the artists hung out in the cafes in order to stay warm. And evidently a prominent conversation was who had the best idea of an outfit that was going to keep you warm. And it was generally agreed that an English tweed jacket would keep you warmer than anything else. And I actually found a passage that said Picasso was the first artist who was able to put enough money aside to buy a Harris tweed jacket. So I had to put him in the Harris tweed jacket. Soutine, if you're all familiar with him and his work, he grew up in a Jewish farming community in Eastern Europe. His father was an unsuccessful tailor. He wanted to be an artist. It was a religious community. He asked the rabbi for permission to do his portrait. The rabbi agreed. The portrait was done. And when the rabbi's sons came in and discovered this portrait had been done, they, being much more religious than their father, chased down teenage Soutine and beat him up. Soutine's mother promptly sued the rabbi, and the rabbi felt very guilty, evidently, about this, and he turned over some money. At that point, Soutine's father made him a suit out of burlap, and off he went to conquer the world with the money that his mother had gotten out of the rabbi. So I had to show him in the burlap suit. And this portrait is based on a portrait that Modigliani did of him because I was unable to find a full-length photograph of him. So Monet, my grandmother's favorite painter. Everybody knows Monet. Marie Laurencin. When in the 1950s, Vanity Fair magazine ran a 3-page spread on Marie, and it was all reproductions of her paintings of little girls with their pet dogs. Well, I was blown away because I was a little girl with a dog, and it had never occurred to me that I was proper subject matter for a painting. And so I very carefully cut out all the paintings and taped them up on my wall. And it wasn't until later that I found out what a truly remarkable painter she was. And I encourage you all to look her up. She married at the beginning of the First World War to an Austrian, and they went off and spent the time in Spain. And during the First World War, and she did some really remarkable self-portraits during that time. You knew exactly how she felt about the situation she was in. It turned out her husband was quite an alcoholic, after the war, she went with him to his parents' family in Austria, and she got fed up and left him there and went back to Paris. And she established a very successful portrait career. And I really encourage you to look up her portraits because they are fabulous. And an example, she did a portrait of Coco Chanel, and it's one of my favorite things she's done. And when it was done, Coco looked at it and said, "Well, Marie, darling, I can't buy that from you." And Marie said, "Why?" And Coco said, "Because I look sad." And Marie said to her, "But you are sad." And she said, "Well, yes, I am, darling, but that doesn't sell clothes." Which I just think was amazing. So now Gauguin, everybody knows him. His is one of the biographies that my grandmother read to me. And what I learned as a child from Gauguin is that you have to be selfish. And my grandmother made it very clear to me that his selfishness hurt a lot of people. And as a child, I told myself, all right, I've got to figure out how to be selfish about my time so that I can paint and I can pursue this, but I've got to find a way to do it where I don't hurt people. And to realize it, it just makes me so emotional to realize that I thought that as a little child. I mean, anyway, I still love his work, and I obviously love him. This is me in my brownie costume. I think the photograph was taken the day that I was inducted into the Brownies. Before we get too sentimental, I was out of the Brownies 2 weeks later when I accidentally broke a chair. So it was a short-lived career. Vuillard, I think he was the first painter that I really fell madly in love with. And the painting over in the corner shows me in my youngest version. He lived with his mother and sister, who were seamstresses in Paris, and most of his paintings were about life in the apartment there and what they were up to. And as a child, I can't even tell you why now, I was just absolutely mad about his paintings. So I see him as my mentor. Now, I thought it was only fair to not ask Toulouse to compete in the height column, so I put him on a little stool. And he's working on a painting. When Brian and Sherry came to visit one day, I was working on this piece, and the painting was not done, and so we talked about, what was I going to do with that, and we made the joke that the painting should be called The Lost Lautrec, because someday in the future people would see this and they would just desperately search for this Lautrec that was never found. In fact, I'll explain it to you. In the background is the black cat and the agile rabbit, which were the cafes that these people hung out in. The road going up here is a very steep hill. There's a big stone wall on this side of the road, and on top of that is a graveyard. And he's painting Manet's grave. So the other thing that I wanted to talk briefly about, Sherry suggested that I include some of the collectors, and I like thinking about things, so I thought, would I do that? How would I do that? And I'd been reading about some of the collectors, and so I've basically framed this big painting with two collector portraits. And both paintings refer to Soutine. This is Soutine's portrait of Madeleine Castaing. This is what she looked like. This is from a photograph of her at the time. And this is the painting that he did. And I brought a little prop here to show you. I'll hang this up and then you can come up afterwards and look at it. Somebody said that in all of his portraits, he never showed you what you look like today. He showed you what you were going to look like in the future. And This is a photograph of Madeleine Castaing when she was 80 years old. Isn't that amazing? And this one is Dr. Barnes. And Dr. Barnes is standing in front of a painting that he owned. And this is the crazy wallpaper at the original Barnes house. So, any questions about any specific paintings? Oh, this is Dr. Barnes. He's very sort of stiff and stoogey looking, but he was buying art that was considered extremely radical at the time. And he was the first person to buy soutine. And when he did, he bought 40 pieces. So if it weren't for these collectors, we wouldn't know about any of these people. Yes?
Do you always paint on linen, or did you do that just for this project?
I always paint on linen. I'll tell you why. Years ago, I was painting on canvas, and I discovered that I had a severe allergy to oil paint, and so I had to switch to acrylics, and the color quality between oil and acrylic is drastically different, and so I suffered through this and was very unhappy. And then I was talking to Tom Blackwell one day, and I told him that I wished I could get his color because he was using oil paint. And he said, well, all you have to do is take your canvas and paint it gray or brown or something before you start. And then when you use the acrylic, you'll get the impression, you'll get the same color group that you get from oil paint. And so I tried it, and it was true. And I've actually had a person explain that to me since, that it has to do with, in oil paint, the pigment is ground in a very fine fashion, and it's suspended in an oil, which is thin in its own right. And so the particles of color can come very close together, so when the light hits the oil paint, it reflects that color back to you. In the case of acrylic, the chunks of pigment are not as fine, and the reason they aren't is that it won't suspend in the plastic. So what happens is when the light hits the acrylic paint, the light goes through, past those particles, hits that white background and bounces back. So what you're getting is a backlit color as opposed to light bouncing off the surface of color. But once you've painted your surface a tone before you start, then you don't get that reflection nearly as strongly. And so I did that for a number of years. I painted my canvas gray or brown. And then one day I was at the art supply store and I saw this beautiful linen, and I bought a piece of it, and I thought, that'll save me a lot of time if I don't have to do all that, tone painting to begin with. And so that was 25 years ago or something. So since then I've been painting on linen.
So that's acrylic that you're painting? That is acrylic you're using?
Yes, I'm using acrylic. And I'm using it like watercolor. It's very thin. Because I want these things to move, and I want to be able to roll them up and travel them. I don't want any pigment buildup on it. And so I want all the color to just keep soaking in. And so in order to get a bright color, you have to do 9 or 10 layers of the same color, but it's very thin.
So you don't prep your linen at all? You don't just...
Well, no, but I rabbit skin glue it. Okay, so what I do is I take the piece of fabric and I stretch it on a stretcher and I glue it. And then I'm painting while it's still on the stretcher, and when it's all done, I take it off the stretcher and then I sew up the edges so that it's neat, and I put a pocket in the top, and I have a wonderful blacksmith in Hancock who does my rods and hooks for me. So.
Did you know about oil colors that are water soluble? I'm just
No.
suggesting because I also am allergic to oils.
Oh, okay. But you can use that?
Because you're not using
Is it like casein?
A bit.
Yeah.
Not quite like wash or casein. It's more like, well, I guess it would be.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Anything else? Well, I want you all to participate in our photo plan. That I want you to, everybody to select a mask, and then I just want us to have fun with the mask. Okay? So can we have a group shot? Photo, mask up.
No face or face?
I'm so excited about this. I love this. No, we're going to have backlit. Are you going to have enough flash? I love this.
Everybody gets in the center area.
Oh, this is great.
All right, everybody with their masks up. Everybody have their masks up. Put it up. There we go. Are we ready? Here we go.
Oh,
Take a couple more. This is great. All right, now everybody hold your mask up. There we go. Then I can see your face. Wonderful. Thank you.
thank you.